Okay, everyone, why don't we go ahead and get started? There's some new faces. Why don't we do a round of introductions, if that's okay? Go ahead, Tom?
Tom Gross, representing Somebody.
I didn't mean to say you had a new face, an old face.
I'm an old face.
Andy Silva, Lieutenant San Bernardino, Supervisor Rutherford. Ron Ketchum, Larry McAllen, who represents the cities of San Bernardino.
Bill Glazier, representing Michael Caccioli.
Nancy Velasquez, Governing Board Liaison.
Paul Knight, Information Management, Production.
Matt Holder, Councilman Dwight Robinson from Lake Forest, who represents the cities of Orange County.
James Italy with Orange County, Supervisor Lisa Bartlett.
Jacob Hake with Los Angeles Councilmember Joe Pistagno, City of Los Angeles.
Ben Wong with Councilmember Michael Caccioli, representing the eastern cities of Los Angeles County.
Hi, I'm Barbara Baird, Chief Deputy Counsel in the Legal Office.
Wayne Astry.
Philip Pine, Deputy Executive Officer, Planning, and on the phone. Are they allowed to talk?
On the phone?
I think it's listen only.
It's listen only? Okay.
Oh,
So it's listen only on the phone, I'm sorry. Okay, so as usual, first item on the agenda is reviewing the board meeting agenda
Need senior staff in the back, or just, I don't want to add to the meeting, but Matt looked like he wants to introduce himself.
He just did.
That's
Did that
so
satisfy-
kind of you, Jacob.
Okay, let's go.
Did that satisfy your desire, Matt?
This Matt, we love Matt.
All right, just in the interest of time, they'll have their chance to, they'll introduce themselves as they have to speak as we go forward. Okay, so we'll start on page 8, which is public hearings. But if it's okay, we'll start with item 27. That is the, it's not a public hearing, it's an informational item. We are going to have the public hearing in June on this, but we didn't have a good chance to go to committee on this, so we're just going to brief the full board before the full item comes for an action item in June. But Sarah, do you want to kind of give a rundown of what's happening with that on the ozone in Coachella Valley?
Sure, so I'm Sarah Reese, Assistant Deputy Executive Officer in Planning here at the district. And so Coachella Valley is an area where it's severe non-attainment for ozone. Over the last 2 years, back up, ozone levels were declining. We expected that the area was going to be able to attain the standard by the deadline, which is coming up in June 15th of this year. The last couple of years, we've experienced a slight increase in ozone levels in that area, and so based on the monitoring data, we know we're not going to be able to attain the standard by the June 15th deadline. So what happens in that case is under the Clean Air Act, we're allowed to ask for a bump up to the next classification of non-attainment for ozone, which would be extreme non-attainment. That's the classification that we have in the South Coast Air Basin, so it would be the same as that. We fully expect from our modeling projections that the area is going to attain the standard by the extreme deadline, which is in 2024, probably a little bit earlier than that. So all this bump up does is allow us to extend the deadline, get some more time to be able to attain the standard, and again, based on our projections, we fully expect that we will hit the standard by that time. If we don't get the bump up, EPA would proceed with a finding of failure not to attain, and so then we would proceed with the consequences of that. As a practical matter, there's not really much difference between the two, but we feel that it's more appropriate to proceed with a bump up, proceed with an additional SIP revision that would be the extra plan by which we would show how we're going to attain the standard and be more transparent with the public as to what's going on with air quality.
So just to add, so in either case, the real implication for being an extreme versus being a severe area are the major source thresholds for 2 permitting programs, the NSR program and the Title V program. So we've analyzed the impact, at least on existing sources that are in that interim between 10 tons per day and 25 tons per day, those 2 thresholds. And there's about 5 facilities that have potentials to emit that are in that range, but their actuals are actually less than 10. So there's some options for those facilities in terms of how they want to get some permit changes in order to either become a major source or remain a minor source.
Now, this is the .075 standard. We're talking about.
Thinking about some of those,
This is the 80 ppb
Yeah,
standard.
this is the 1997 8-hour standard.
.075 for 8 hours?
no,
So,
80.
Point eight? Oh, my
It's
God.
0.08.
Wow.
So that one, we here in the basin have until 2024 because we've been extreme. But for Coachella, they only had until 2019 because they were severe. So we'd be getting additional time for Coachella to attain since it's practically entirely a result of emissions from the South Coast Air Basin moving over into Coachella that causes their problem.
So with the transport, obviously it's transport, taking actions on large facilities in Coachella, it's not going to do much in regard to the ozone level.
We're not proposing new actions, but under the Clean Air Act, they are subject to these new major source limits.
And that would happen, as Phil said,
Either way.
whether we bump up or whether we wait until EPA
Yeah.
says you failed to attain, and then they would force that
Yeah, there's
regulation.
not much practical difference in terms of what would happen to the area if there was a finding of failure to attain versus going through the bump up. But, again, we feel it's better to go through the process, revise the SIP, show how we're going to attain the standard by 2024.
And the major practical distinction is that if we don't do the bump up and the area is held to fail to attain, then we have to implement the Section 185 fees, which are also imposed on major sources. And basically, that says that you either reduce your emissions if you're a major source to 80% of what it was in the attainment year, or you pay a fee on the difference, which is, with inflation, is now up to $10,000 a ton.
I think the public perception aspect as well is very important. I don't want to give the administration any opportunity to say that we in California have failed.
Right.
So the bump up request is something that is not atypical. This district itself has requested bump ups many times. So it's really not that out of the ordinary.
So do you have to do an actual emission inventory of the facilities, or do you just go on potential to emit?
So for 12 months from the establishing the new attainment deadline, we would have to submit a new SIP. We project that we will meet the standard by 2024 without a lot of new measures, if any new measures, because it's all based on what's happening in the basin. So it's all based on the current AQMP for the basin.
So as we clean up,
Yeah.
they should be.
So there's still a question of how if we have to start from scratch on that new SIP, or whether we can build upon some of the other work that we've been doing over the years. But we'll be working with EPA on that.
So with the facilities you do an inventory on, if it's lower than their potential to emit, that you're estimating now.
But the main, it's not so much an inventory. So again, whether you're a major or minor source, there's two programs. There's NSR, and then there's Title V. Title V is just kind of, you're bumped into this facility level permit versus an individual equipment permit if you're a major source. And also there's a longer public process and EPA approval for that permit if you're Title V. And under NSR, you're subject to major source backed versus minor source backed and offset requirements if you're modifying. Now there could be new facilities coming in that now will have this lower threshold as well.
So,
Yeah.
go ahead.
But existing facilities, we've analyzed the 5 that we think come here. I don't know what they're going to decide to do. It's up to them, but they can
They have options.
They have options. They can lower their PTE to 10 or below 10. Right now, their actuals are mostly well below 10. So that's one option. Or they can become a major source, Title V permit, and go that way.
Is that Comac biomass plant still out there? Does anyone know?
Yes.
But
Still
that's
But it's
operating?
on
tribal.
Indian land, so it's
It's an
EPA
EPA
will
permit.
deal with that. It's already an EPA permit anyway.
No.
And Title V, actually.
And is the bump up automatic when we request it, or is it?
They have to take
is it-
action.
There's discretion.
They have to take action, but it's not discretionary. In the Clean Air Act, it says the administrator shall grant.
So if we ask, they have to give it to us.
Now, we may have difficulty in this space, meeting the 2.08 by 24.
It's a challenge.
I mean, a lot of difficulty in here, so.
That's 400 tons between friends.
But just note this, in Coachella Valley, the attainment strategy did not and will not rely on the 182E5 measures. So the amount of emission reductions to bring the basin into attainment are much, much greater than the amount of emission reductions to bring Coachella Valley into
Can you
attainment.
explain the 182E5? Does everybody know the 182E5?
Black box.
Black box.
Black box.
Can you give me a 20-second brief?
I was going to say.
20 seconds. So under the
Or
Clean
whatever
Air,
you need to facilitate that.
20 seconds. Under the Clean Air Act, if you're extreme non-attainment area, you could be, you can rely on future advances in technology to emission reductions from future advances in technology to fill the gap between the emission reductions you have in your plan and what you need for attainment. And it doesn't have to be as specific.
It's called the black box.
Then no.
It means you don't know how you're going to get there, but whatever it is, that's what you're putting in.
Gotcha.
So whenever you hear 182E5, that's
But I
what,
know QMP does not have a black box anymore
because we know how.
because we have
to get
technology to get there.
It's a green box
there. Just
or a
costs.
glass box,
lot of
transparent
money.
box.
Okay, like that.
Okay, any questions on that? We're on an accelerated schedule on that because EPA is of the opinion that we have to get this request in, they actually have to take action before this attainment deadline hits in June, which means in parallel, they're preparing a notice of an action as we're going through this, assuming our board will adopt this in June.
Right now, this does not require board action, right?
Not this one, but we'll come back in June for board action. This is just a briefing.
Okay, but the board does need to take action to
Yes.
do the
Yes.
bump up. Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
In June.
Okay.
We're doing all the SIP noticing and outreach and workshopping that we need to do for that. Okay, any other questions on that? So first public hearing is the budget. I'll let Sujata start and talk about where we are on the budget, and then we can talk a little bit about the Reg 3 changes.
So yeah, this item is to adopt the executive officer's proposed goals and objectives and budget for fiscal year 1920, and also proposed amendments to Regulation 3Ps. So I'll just briefly touch on the budget. The goals and objectives, we have 3 goals and 20 priority objectives. These were all discussed at the budget workshop, and the suggestions have been incorporated. The budget for fiscal year 1920 is a balanced budget at $170.9 million, and last year's budget, the 18-19 budget, was also a balanced budget at $162.6 million. And so the difference is mainly in the salaries and expenditures, the $8.8 million, and that's because we added 63 new positions, and they were mainly added during the mid-year adjustment, and they are all grant funded, pretty much all grant funded positions. So you see the change in the expenditures, and you'll also see an increase in the revenue. There are some proposed staffing changes in this budget that we are bringing. There's basically a net add of 1 position. There are 2 additions. One is for an administrative secretary and a program supervisor in the Legislative and Public Affairs Division, and we are deleting the chief administrative officer's position. So there's just 1 add, but there is 3 ADO positions that are being deleted and 3 DO positions that are being added in divisions HR, Finance, and IM. And 2 positions are being downgraded for the principal office assistant, and they are being downgraded to supervising office assistant. And there is 1 change in title for the health effects officer to be now Director of Community Air Programs / Health Effects Officer. And finally, there is an increase in salary for the COO for $12,816. So those are the staffing changes, and basically the 5-year projection, we are at or above the governing board's policy of 20% of reserves, 20% of revenue to be in the reserves. So for the first year, we are at or above 20%, and then we do go down below that. But we have demonstrated by looking back, in our historically, we have been we have managed to be at or above 20%. So this projection, the 5-year projection, it does include CPI increases at 3.5%. And the last year of Title V fee increase will be in 1920, and salary increases that were authorized by the board, they are in 1920 and 2021, and then retirement cost increases. And our vacancy rate for 1920 is going to be at 10%, and after that it's back to 8%. And with that, I'll be happy to answer questions.
And the big topic of discussion will be the toxics fees, I imagine.
That's
Yeah,
we'll
that,
talk about
I'll let Phil talk about that one.
So just any questions on just the general budget?
Well, on the unreserved, the projection is by 23, 24, it's gonna be only 14%. Are we thinking about how we're gonna bump that up to the 20%?
Well, Sujata actually addressed that. So when we actually look at the projections, years 4 and 5 of the 5-year budget are always going down, but we always manage in the existing and within the next year to keep it at the higher level. So that's where, we had asked Sujata to look back at that historical perspective, and that's where we can say we haven't dropped below that, and we can manage that.
And on the salary, does that include monies for the salary increases? The 141?
The salary increases?
Well, the cost of living increases.
Yes, so the salary increases were authorized by the board last June. And so we had the first year of salary increases, so it was a 3-year contract.
Oh, okay.
So in 1920 and 2021, we have that, and nothing beyond that. We don't have a cost of increase in the entire 5-year projection.
Any other questions on the budget in general? All right, so I'll let Ian talk about the changes to the fee rules.
So, John, planning manager. Every year we always bring Regulation 3 amendments as part of the budget. Regulation 3 includes all the fees for permitting programs, emissions fees, et cetera. So there's a number of routine amendments. I'm not going to go through the typical for what we do every year. There's a little bits of cleanup that we do within Regulation 3, clarifying amendments, et cetera. The thing that has sparked the most discussion has been proposed change to the toxics emissions fees for stationary sources. And so currently, roughly about 1,500 facilities report emissions to the district annually and pay emissions fees based on those reported emissions. When we look at the total revenue collected for emissions fees, it's about $20 million a year, but only about $500,000 of that is on toxics emissions. When we went back and looked at what is the district workload associated with toxics work on stationary sources for which emissions fees can be used to be paid to pay for that work, that's actually about $20 million. So we collect about $500,000, but we expend about $20 million in district resources. About half of that is current existing district workload. A lot of that is there's been some changes in recent years that we're anticipating to continue moving forward. Some of that includes new risk guidance from the state, which has really increased the cancer risk from facilities across the board. A lot of the work that we've done in Paramount and in other communities. A lot of the work we're doing, we're discovering fugitive emissions from both metal working industries as well as fugitive hydrocarbons from a lot of other industries. And we're expecting that work to continue. And then layered on top of all that, we have AB 617. We have received some one-time funding, grant funding that Sujata touched on for AB 617. There's no guarantee that's going to continue into the future. So we know we have a lot of work there. And much of that from the district side is going to be on stationary source toxics. So what we're proposing in this fee amendment is to restructure the toxic emissions fee. So the current program now charges a certain dollar amount per pound of toxic pollutant. And it varies a little bit between, say, hexavalent chromium and benzene. So what we're proposing is to scrap that structure and restructure it such that every facility that reports toxic emissions will pay just a base minimal fee, about $78. And that base minimal fee just pays for the basic work for maintaining the software and very minimal staffing to just make sure facilities can actually report emissions to the district. Then there will be a second fee that would be a device fee, and that is for every device that a facility has that emits toxics and that they report on. They would pay a fee of $341 and change for that device level fee. And the reason we were doing this is that when we looked at the district workload for a lot of the for all of the toxic inventory work that we do, it really depends a lot on the complexity of the facility. And so the number of devices really gets at the complexity of the facility, so that ties really closely to what the district workload is. So we're trying to recover the fees based on the district workload. And then finally, there's another fee that would be a cancer potency weighted fee. And so this way, hexavalent chromium, for example, is a very highly toxic compound compared to other compounds like formaldehyde. And so those facilities that have very high hexchrome emissions will be paying more than equivalent pounds of formaldehyde. All in, we expect that these new toxic fees would raise about $4.9 million a year in revenue. Currently, we said there's about $500,000, so it will be an increase of $4.4 million we're expecting once the final phase-in of this rule goes into effect. We're right now proposing a 3-year phase-in of these fees. The first year, there would actually be no change other than the typical CPI increase. The same structure would actually stay for this first year. But then the following 2 years would be roughly 50% increase to phase these fees in. Let's see if there's any questions.
Questions on that?
Any thought to the concern about, I know it's a 3-year 50/50 instead of 33. Any thoughts on stretching that out a little longer that is requested by some folks?
I mean, we've gotten some comments on that. We think a 3-year phase-in is already more than I guess we did last year. We did a 3-year phase-in, so there's precedent for that. And this is actually a more, quote, lenient phase-in because we're doing 0% in the first year. There are reasons to have that 0% in the first year because giving facilities time to do either source testing or refine their emission factors or things. Once they see the structure in place and they can calculate exactly what the impact will be. But at the same time, we didn't propose 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 because we wanted to give people time. So we thought we were being as generous as we could, but we've definitely received that comment. We've also received a comment that a little more time before the board considers this, just because it's been, it's really been out there about 6 to 7 weeks since we did the first notice, maybe a little more. Mid-March. So we're also considering those comments as well. And then I guess the last set of comments is, well, there's more than that, but one other set of comments is, there's going to be a lot of source testing review work that goes along with adopting this new fee structure and some commitment by the district to work with facilities to make sure that workload is handled and things are done in an expedited manner. Also trying to maybe develop new emission factors on a more expedited basis that general facilities can use, update those factors so not everyone has to do that source test. So those are things that we're committed to. So any other questions for us on the fee rule?
What kind of effort would it take to refine the emission factors? Seems like that would be a
So
ton of.
historically, it's been a slow, long effort. So that there's these quote databases of emission factors. EPA has AP42. CARB has a set of emission factors. These are default factors you would use in the absence of a source test to report your emissions. And then we have some of our own too. But typically, the time frame for gathering enough approved source tests to say, okay, this emission factor that's on the books, this default factor that's on the books, we can now change it based on this historical record of all these other tests. That has been a very long process. There's no reason it really has to be. So I think we're going to be working closely with CARB mostly on the toxic side to figure out how we can update those things. And there's already an effort to make sure that those are done on a consistently statewide. But it's going to take some work, dedicated work from CARB and us and CAPCOA and other districts to come together on that. And that was already in the works because of what CARB's doing with their toxics reporting rule. So it's going to happen.
I just want to comment on Phil's note earlier about the 3-year versus longer. One of the big things that you all know that we're doing is working on trying to get enhanced funding within the state. And one of the big comments that we hear from legislators and their staff is that the districts have to do more to recover some of these costs. And the fact that we were able to talk about this rule was really, I hope, persuasive in terms of what the legislature is going to propose when it comes to the GHG allocation. So the 3 years was kind of a stretch for them. They wanted to see 2 years, but I think that 3 years was something that, there was precedent for. We talked about the way that it provided that first year with the ability to understand what was going on to do certain testing. And I think that was accepted as well. So while I recognize that what we're looking at is the impacts in the district, it also impacts what we're able to get from the state aspect. And that's where the big allocation is going to come from on the GHG side, whether it's enhancing the 617 allocation or looking at other aspects that we're trying to look at as well. So just something to consider.
Any other questions? Okay, and I think Ian mentioned there's the CPI increases in there, the automatic CPI increase, as well as, again, some minor adjustments to fees that we do, like we do every year. Some free relief, some small increases. Okay, if there's no other questions on 28, we'll go to item 29 on page 9, 1106 and 1106.1. Dave, do you want to just give a brief summary of that?
Thank you. David DeBoer, Planning and Rules Manager. Rule 1106 and 1106.1 are two regulations that deal with marine coating and pleasure craft coating operations. Relatively small categories, but this is something where these regulations haven't been looked at or amended since the mid-90s. In 2015, we took the same proposal to the board to basically take two rules, combine them into one rule. So the intention is to rescind the pleasure craft coating operation regulation 1106.1 and combine that with 1106 for one rule. What compliance staff found in the field back in 2015, and we were still finding it out during the current rule development process, was there's just a lot of confusion. There's approximately 14 facilities or shipyards within our air basin that utilize these types of coatings on a rather small basis. And what they do is they'll take two rules and they'll say, well, which rule applies to me? I'm not sure. And sometimes what they'll do is use a higher VOC product on a situation like on a large vessel when they shouldn't. And so what we've tried to do is through multiple stakeholder meetings, we've addressed it. We did the same thing in 2015, but it didn't pass the board because there were more concerns with a lot of record-keeping requirements and things like that. So fast forward to this rulemaking, we've removed all the record-keeping requirements that were onerous on the stakeholders. Certain labeling requirements were not necessary. And we worked closely with them. Also, there was some requests for exemptions on certain types of coatings, such as UV, EV, curable coatings. So again, we've carved out some exemptions. If you have products that are less than 50 grams per liter that are UV curable, and you can provide proof of ASTM test method results specific to thin film coatings and formulation data, then they can be exempt from the regulation. So the entire regulation would then be, you'd have two both into one. So you'd have pleasure craft and marine coatings. We also are aligning it with EPA RAC requirements. We did note in 2015 and currently that there were some categories that we didn't even address in our regulation. So we're trying to align that with EPA RAC standards. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
And
Any
just
questions?
while we're here, just to get it all done at once, there's another item you'll see in the set hearings. This comes back, 1106. And the reason for that is because of those RAC requirements, we do have to submit this amendment into the SIP. And when the notice went out for the hearing next week, we made a mistake and said it was not going to be submitted into the SIP. So what we're going to do in June is come back and just as a cleanup, we're going to renotice it and then have the board approve submitting it into the SIP. That's all we're doing in June, but we have to set a hearing for that and go through the 30-day process. But it's really just adopting the rule in May, and then in June, the board can approve submittal to the SIP.
So the notice for the June hearing is, Phil was saying, is really limited on whether to submit it to the SIP, which we think we're required to do. It's not trying to reopen 1106 again in June.
Just making it a SIP rule.
So we do have a public comment on this. Rita?
Thank you for the carrots.
Thank you. Good morning. Rita Loof. I'm the Director of Environmental Affairs for RADTEC International. And for the new faces in the room, RADTEC is a organization made up of about 800 members nationwide in North America. That includes Canada as well. And then we have sister organizations in China, Asia, and Europe, and South America. We represent the ultraviolet electron beam and LED industry, which essentially means light cure technology, specialty chemicals that are formulated so that all of the materials are trapped in the formulation. It's polymer science. You get one giant molecule at the end. It all stays on the actual substrate, and there are no emissions. So that's how we're different from traditional chemistries where you're laying down the formulation that consists of pigments and solvents and you're waiting for the paint to dry. So in our case, the materials cure whenever they see the light, instantaneously, in milliseconds, at the speed of light, literally. So we're low VOC technology. Most of our materials are less than 50 grams per liter. This is a picture of our magazine cover for 1 year when we won the Clean Air Award from the district. So we've been recognized as environmentally friendly, pollution prevention, but with that, because we're different and because our VOCs are very low, typically less than 50, like I mentioned, but for some coatings we could have 10 or 20, we don't really fit in the traditional test method. So the rule proposal is definitely an improvement. I agree with Dave. Most of our concerns have been alleviated, and I think we could probably live with the spirit and the intent that staff has expressed to us, that basically they don't want to set up a gotcha situation where our people would get notices of violation just because of a difference in test method. So I think if we can get some resolution language, just reassuring our industry that, you know, our materials are not going to be penalized just because of a technicality, not really VOC content, because the rule has a lot of limits at 300, 400, there's even one at 730 grams per liter, and we're below 50. So our issue is not the emission reduction. We give you voluntary emission reductions. Thank you so much.
Okay. Any other questions on this item?
I know we've discussed this in the past, and Rita, thank you again but how do we, is that possible to memorialize it? I always look, when we do stuff in our ordinances and our laws, and we leave stuff for sort of interpretation, and when we were all passed on from here, retired, I'm not like that, but like, we've all left, when we've left, then it's the person behind us that has to interpret what we've left behind, and sometimes that just leaves a little bit of uncertainty. So, Dave, thank you so much I know it's a tough issue, and it was an issue for the board. Then, some of you guys have done amazing work, but this one last component, how do we tweak that so we don't have the inadvertent side effect of penalization that she's talking about, but we hit the spirit and intent of the new rule?
Yeah, so this is an issue we've been dealing with, not in just this rule. It's that the method that determines the VOC content of these materials can't be used as an enforcement method in our lab unless we have the formulation information. So we think we've crafted a way in this rule and the exemption language to acknowledge that method and actually use that method to whether you're going to qualify for an exemption or not, versus like as a pure compliance tool. When it's a pure compliance tool, EPA needs to approve that method, right? And that's this, and they can't approve that method if it's not repeatable by anyone, and anyone's not going to. You can't have everyone having access to the formulation information. So there's this catch-22 that's come back over and over and over again. And we think what we've done here is like 95% of the way there in terms of solving that problem. There's always going to be that little gap of compliance uncertainty, and we'll work to try to find some language for resolution that can help fill that last 5%. I don't know how far we can go. There's some limitations on what you can say about that and still have it be, SIP approvable, but we can work with you on that.
Do we add that type of language to the rule? I mean, we're going to pass the rule and then still kind of work out that detail. Should we?
Well, if there was a method that could do that, I mean, we just don't have that method, right? So, but we could commit towards working towards that method, and until we've had this resolution and other rules, until we have that method, we can hint that there's work to be done, but there's some limitations in what you can say in resolution language legally in terms of enforcement.
We would not say that this is equivalent to a compliance method in the resolution language. EPA would not accept that. They've been on record and been very clear. They also acknowledge that there are no comparable test methods that these categories of products could use, but they sort of shrug their shoulders and leave it at that.
I'm just saying we have to be a little careful in how we do it. We're willing to go as far as we can, but we have to be a little careful in how we phrase it.
So I think, like you acknowledged, Jacob, we moved quite a bit on this one, and we really, I think, met the spirit of what the committees and the board has discussed. We're at 50, and by having that formulation data, we think we have ways to maintain the compliance aspects that we need. On the issue of the resolution, we always have enforcement discretion. I think the board, unless you get complete turnover of the board and a complete change in how you look at the enforcement aspect, it seems unlikely. You're always looking at the sort of historical basis for how you move forward. But as Phil said, we'll think about it. But I guess what I would try to convey upon all of you is that we've made tremendous progress. I mean, you heard Rita say that they could probably live with it. I don't think I've ever heard Rita ever say that before. So that is really significant when she says that. So I would just, we're working on it.
I actually ate the chocolate carrots this time. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on that? All right, we'll move back to page 2 of the board agenda. Kind of already covered the set hearing item 2, but is there any other questions on that? That's just, again, this taking what we adopt, hopefully next week, and just submitting it to the SIP and getting a proper notice out there. On to page 3.
So item 3, it's Matt Nisab, the Deputy for Science and Technology Advancement. Item 3 is to develop and demonstrate a medium-heavy electric vehicle with Roush technology. You may have heard of Roush before. They're a qualified vehicle manufacturer that upfits Ford products. So this is a Ford 650, 750 kind of work truck platform. They've been historically known in the propane world, but now they're developing electric trucks. So it's a good way of getting to a Ford product without actually best thing to do in dealing with Ford itself. So we're recommending a project with them not to exceed $937,000 to develop and demonstrate this electric truck platform. Oh, I'm sorry, we added another item here. It's just an administrative item. In the previous board letter, we awarded a contract with CEC funds to deploy near zero emission natural gas trucks. And in the board letter, we identified the truck as a drayage truck. It's actually a waste hauler. So we're just cleaning that up. Just the board's aware that we're making that change. There's no change in award amounts, it's just changing it from a drayage truck to a waste hauler. No questions on that one? The next one is also mine. It's to recognize funds as part of the Aliso Canyon settlement. It's a supplemental environmental project that was negotiated with the California Attorney General's office. And it's to deploy our air filters in public schools in the city and county of Los Angeles. So this was an agreement that was reached between the violator and the Attorney General's office, and they asked us to administer the program because of the successful air filter projects that we've done in the past. So we're recognizing just over $70 million, and then we will be deploying it in different schools, typically near and around busy roadways.
One broad question. How many of the schools in LA County area will have this increased filtration system, compared to, say, San Bernardino, which is the area I'm concerned about?
I'd have to look back at the total amount, but I think the majority of them have been in the Long Beach, LA region, and those are just because the settlements that occur, they negotiate to be either near where the violation occurred, or in this case, they just negotiate to be in the LA County area. We do have schools that we deploy air filters in the San Bernardino region, as anything around near the rail yards, but I'd have to get that complete list.
And Coachella Valley.
And Coachella Valley.
Yeah, I think it was a couple months ago, we awarded a bunch to Coachella.
It seems to me that the schools, this is not San Bernardino, but in Riverside County, the Mariloma area, probably have the highest particulate level, right, in the district. So probably could.
But recall, so these filters are intended to, for the most part, capture black carbon and ultrafine particulates that come from.
Well, they have a lot of warehouse activity, diesel activity in both of those counties. So I would think a pretty good percentage of the. I know there's some transportation of particulates, but I would think Mariloma has a lot of localized.
Yeah. So as our own legal offices look at SEPs, they look for being able to distribute those in regions that are underserved or previously underserved. But like I said, it's typically they try to do it in and around the areas where the violations occur.
We should all go to Coachella this weekend and take a look.
That was last week. You should.
Oh, last weekend. All right, missed it.
No, the stagecoach is this weekend.
Oh, is it this weekend?
I like country music.
I once tried coming back from Palm Springs on the last day of the stagecoach.
Oops.
Traffic would be fine. It was horrible. It took me three times the amount of time to get back to my house because of all that traffic.
Okay, page 4, item 5, I'll handle that for Susan. So this is, so for our rule 1109.1, it's our refinery barked rule. And as we've done in other big barked rules, we want to have an outside independent assessment of our barked assessment, our best available retrofit control technology assessment. We originally asked the board to allocate 100,000 to this, and we went out for bid. Based on what we got back, we thought that there were two very well qualified contractors, but we also realized that there's probably more work to do than can fit in 100,000. So we're coming back to up that to 200,000 and then split the contract between the two well qualified contractors and split the work into different tasks and then again award the two contracts. The money was available, has been set aside under some AB 617 state legislative funding. Any questions on that?
So the split is with two different groups doing the analysis, the data is going to be able to overlap pretty well.
We are going to, there's a few, they're not overlapping the same analysis. They're not doing the same analysis. And again, they're
bringing it all together.
We'll bring it all together, and they are going to work with each other on that. But one is looking at kind of the technology and the emission limits that staff develops, and then they review that. The other one's looking at very specific like space and logistical constraints about installing that technology at the specific refineries. So they've kind of split the tasks a little bit. Okay, if there's no questions on 5, Jason, number 6.
So good morning, everybody. I'm Jason Lowe, the Assistant Deputy in Technology Advancement. Straightforward item to transfer up to $160,000 into the Science and Technology Advancement budget to realize expenditures between the major offices of salaries and benefits to the services by category of temporary services for our enhanced participant monitoring program. That all for somebody taking a question.
And then see if it'll fit. That's the option. Okay, any questions for Jason? All right, Sujata, number 7.
Thanks, Bill. So this action is to transfer the first of the 5 installments of $841,353 from the general fund, the unreserved fund balance, into the special fund health effects research fund. And at the end of the 5 years, this is going to be $4,206,765 transfer.
This is a catch-up, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Because we weren't paying into.
What's the mechanism to approve funding various projects from this? Is it done at the staff level, or does it go to the board?
Goes to the board.
So the Health Effects Research Fund is a board fund.
Well,
Then
I
the
understand.
board can approve transfers of that into
So
either
it would-
expenditures from, but historically they have approved transfers of that into the Health Effects of Air Pollution Foundation, which is a separate entity.
Is that the Dr. Black one? So that normally just goes directly, I thought there were other projects that were outside of his area.
There are.
Yeah, it doesn't go directly. The board decides,
Yeah.
and then even when it gets to the foundation board has to make a determination on what particular project.
Right. But more than Dr. Black has been funded out of that foundation.
So every time this comes up, the board asks about research. When's a good time to get an update on the research?
When Joe K's
Interesting
available.
Well, we actually have Dr. Black coming in November to give an update.
Okay.
So we were trying to get it sooner, but given his schedule, he's not available. And the other 2 projects, I think, were close to winding up, and so we thought it'd be best to just wait till they were done and they could come and present.
Okay.
Were you talking about the specific funded projects or like
Yeah.
research in general?
No, just the projects that this
Yeah, we'll definitely
funds. I know they've done some
provide
cool
updates.
stuff. That would be,
We've also done a recent request for proposals. We've only received 1 thus far.
Okay, any other questions on that? Number 7. Okay, number 8, Sujata.
This item is to approve the board member consultant and board member assistant's compensation for fiscal year 1920. And it's shown in attachment A, the distribution, and it's in accordance with our admin code 112. Happy to answer questions on this one.
Right, the next one's yours,
The next
Sujan.
one's mine too. And this is just an item to approve amendments to our procurement policy. And this is mainly to revise the definition of a business using low emission vehicles to a business using zero or near zero vehicles for conducting deliveries to the South Coast area.
Okay, any questions? All right, Ron, the next two are yours.
Good morning, Ron Oscar, Chief Information Officer. This is a standard request to purchase Onbase software subscription and support for 1 year. Onbase is our document management system, which supports most of our district systems, including permitting, compliance, class, finance, and public records. Funds are available in our budget, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Next one. This is a standard request to transfer funds in order to complete a number of application development projects, including enhancing our PeopleSoft payroll system and for our security portal that supports Title V and other compliance reporting needs. The funds are available in our budget. I'm happy to answer your questions.
Okay, any questions for Ron? Okay, item 12 is the new suggested hearing board appointments. Denise isn't here.
So on the hearing board, the committee selected or recommended Senator Holden and Cynthia Verdugo Peralta, is that right? As the permanent members. And the incumbent for Holden for the alternate was the same person, I just forgot his name. And
Robert Copeland, I think.
Copeland?
I think.
And then Gideon was the alternate for Cynthia.
Gideon Krakoff.
Krakoff.
Intern.
And the board will look at, the committee will look at the medical board selection in May.
Okay, any questions on the hearing board?
And the candidates had impressive pedigrees, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Okay,
The next one.
item 13.
MSRC, this is a pretty standard item for the MSRC. They have their own outreach services contractor, and so they're just simply putting out a solicitation for people to bid on their outreach contract. So that consultant usually does their newsletter, advises them on legislative events happening in Sacramento, and does press releases. So this is just to do the solicitation, and then they'll bring it back to the board for consideration. It'll be a 2-year contract.
Okay, we move on to page 6. Any questions on the receive and file reports, 14 through 19?
So would this be appropriate time to ask a question on SB 732 on item 14, or is that better to wait till item 22?
Yeah. That's fine. 14, 22, sure. I think it's on the agenda.
So just kind of in a broad sense, at the Ledge Committee meeting on April 12th, staff had recommended, disclose, I guess, or, put out that they're asking for a pause on 732. As we all know, it was heard in committee yesterday. So can we just get a little bit of background on what happened in between those two things, in between those 2 dates and those 2 weeks? And, and I understand, just trying to get a feel for what happened.
Sure. We actually sent information out to the Ledge Committee. I think it was Sunday or Monday.
Oh, it was Monday? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was Monday. in part because things have been so chaotic. So we had put the request in for them to pull the bill, to pause the bill. And it was last Saturday, which was, I don't know, 4 or 5 days ago, that we got a response from Senator Allen saying that he intended to push the bill through. And so we then were concerned because we had said to the committee that we had put a pause, and the trouble was we were concerned that should we now go before the before the Senate Committee, Governance and Finance Committee, and testify when we had said that we were going to pull. So we contacted the committee chairman and asked her what her preference was. The governing board has directed us to move forward on this bill, and so if they were going to move the bill through, then we had to do a couple of things. One is, if we didn't appear before the Senate committee, it would have sent the complete wrong message to the legislature that South Coast can't be counted on to appear when the author comes out, and we would be facing with a loss of confidence and the ability to move future legislation. So with that, we made the decision to go and appear, and that was fine, I think I would say, with people that we spoke with. Yesterday and the day before, we were in Sacramento, and I can tell you that until maybe 5:30, we didn't know whether or not the bill was going to be heard. Because what we heard over the 2 days was, you guys asked to pull this, but we think it needs to move forward. Wait a minute, we're hearing from unions, we're hearing from all these people. Oh my God, what do you guys got us into? We're gonna pull the bill. And we're like, okay, that's what we asked you to do. And then it was, no, we're gonna push the bill through. So literally, we waited in the room not knowing whether or not the bill was going to be brought before the committee yesterday. And I wanna say it was 6 o'clock?
It was 4:45.
4:45. It felt much later.
Yes.
When they called the item up. And literally, we walked up and we just made the presentation. It did pass out of committee on a 4-to-1 vote, and it goes to approps. I will be very honest with you guys. This will be a very tough bill to get by, and the trades and the unions have made this very difficult, and it all goes back to 1410. And they're fighting us on everything.
Question for you, quickly.
Sure.
You mentioned you had your presentation and went through. I did not watch that yet. I'll have to go back and listen or whatever, but I'm assuming your presentation did not make any comment related to the ask to put a pause to the bill. Is that correct?
No.
So there was a full SCAQMD staff support with a historic direction?
It was, this is your bill, and yeah.
I'm real excited about Senator Beal wanting to make it more transportation. It's like,
yeah.
I don't want to see this become like GGRF, where it's a new pot of money that everyone wants to get their hands on.
So Senator Bell, I do the same thing, Andy. It's spelled B-E-A-L-L, but he pronounces Bell. Senator Bell is from Transportation Committee.
He's chair of the Transportation Committee.
And wants to make sure that transit and transportation concerns are addressed. He didn't quite say that it had to go back to his committee or to become a full transportation bill, but there were amendments that were offered up by Move LA that had many transit elements and transportation elements. And so when asked, we said we would be more than happy to work with the author and the stakeholder to try to come to some type of agreement.
My sense is the organization that had about 10 different newspapers has taken a editorial position against 737.
732.
I don't know what the times. I thought you had an excellent op-ed piece in the paper Monday, or, and I'm wondering if you're planning to do some board, editorial boards with the papers to try to get some support.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we could do, Ron, but to be honest, it's the trades and the unions that are wielding amazing influence in Sacramento. And I just can't stress enough that because of what we're doing on the refineries, they're just going to us. Matt?
And I don't want to try to get too much in the weeds on this, and try to, but is it been contemplated that maybe there's a point where the bill changes substantially enough that it would need to come back to the governing board for continued approval of going forward with it?
So that was one of the things that Senator Allen actually said in his letter to us, was that the legislation may come to a point where we don't have the support of the governing board or the support of the South Coast Air Quality Management District. And obviously, if we felt that it detracted from implementation of the AQMP, fully funding the AQMP, that's where we would come back. Like if they said, we're only going to give you 10% for your AQMP funding,
right,
we would bring that back.
Yeah, and I ask these questions with the full knowledge how quickly things change up in Sacramento, and with respect for what you guys are dealing with. And I hope you're taking it in that vein. That I'm not trying to put anybody on the spot here or try to project out into the future exactly what we're going to do, but there's some concerns that feedback that we get from the community and from Councilman Robinson himself, that just in keeping an eye on what's happening up there. So.
Well, I think if they turn it into a transit bill and they're using us as the vehicle and we have to put the money out directly to the other agencies, that's not what we signed up for. We signed up for the AQMP. And so that's where I think working with all of us is, like I said earlier, it's got to fund the AQMP. Now, that's not to say that if they say, well, we'll give you 70% or 50%, that's a line that I think we'll have to assess when we get there. But certainly, we want the majority. But I think we understand that there has to be some negotiation.
Just random editorial thought was the Metrolink piece. First thing I thought is that helps light duty, but light duty is not the problem.
Well, that's
Metrolink doesn't take one single truck off the road.
And that's what we were explaining to members, is that while congestion and reduced VMT is good, it doesn't necessarily get us the emission reductions that we need, and that's where our focus is. And it's real expensive to do the transit.
People are using transit.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions on that particular topic while we're on it? Any other questions on page 6 on the reports? Okay, page 7. Any questions on the committee reports?
I have one question. This is involving the report that we get each year on CEQA, part of the Mobile Source Committee. And I noticed that there was a huge number of warehouses being pushed through in that report. And my question is, on the indirect source rule that we're looking at for warehouses, are we looking at new ones, or are we looking at all warehouses?
We're currently looking at new and existing.
Because it looks like they're trying to shove this stuff through. I mean, it was like 10 or 12, which was a lot more than we normally had. I don't know if you noticed that, but
so
a lot of warehouses being, and most of them from San Bernardino County.
I mean, I can't imagine that's due to our rulemaking, but there's just a lot of activity and a lot of growth.
Well, I've been looking at this for a year, and nothing came close to what I saw.
It's I think it's just economic conditions, because we've been clear all along that we're looking at new and existing, although
So when you say new and existing, that's all.
that's all, yeah.
Yeah.
There's nothing
Oh,
else.
new and
between new.
existing, okay.
So it's all.
Right.
Now, there could be different requirements for new versus
Right.
existing, but we're looking at all of it.
Well, it just seemed like there was a big uptick, so.
Actually, I'm going to the logistics workshop tomorrow. That should be interesting.
What's that?
I think it's Inland Empire Economic Partnership is having a logistics summit tomorrow at the Fairplex in Pomona.
I think we send people to that usually.
It looks
As
like
you say, that's their annual one, right?
I think so. Looks like a good program. Mark Taylor is at ACT right now, so if he's lucky, really cool boys.
Okay, any other questions on page 7? Okay, I think that covers the agenda. Any other business? Any other?
Leonard Transportation Center, Cal State San Bernardino had a little thing yesterday on electrification, and Joe from your staff was there. It was actually not a lot of people, it was maybe a dozen or so, but it was a really good program. Edison was there talking about its infrastructure to support electrification. It was a good little program. It was worthwhile.
Can't look at Tom anymore for that.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else? Any public comment? All right, we'll adjourn. Thank you very much. Next meeting, May 30th.